Let me welcome everyone to this conversation about the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which will be held here in Washington in less than 2 months. And I especially want to welcome our guests from the administration who will tell us more about this important initiative. Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas-Greenfield, Gayle Smith and Grant Harris from the National Security Council, and Earl Gast from USAID. I also want to recognize Ambassador Princeton Lyman, who's a member of the NED board and who's our board specialist on Africa, who helps us oversee the whole Africa program of the NED, which is a very important part of what we do. In a moment, I'm going to turn the chair over to Dave Peterson, who is the NED Senior Director overseeing the Africa Grants Program. And he'll moderate today's conversation, but let me just say a couple of things first by way of introduction. We think that the Africa Leaders Summit is a very important initiative, and we want to do everything that we can to support it. We're happy that there will be a civil society and governance component within the summit, and we're especially pleased that the administration is using this opportunity here today to begin to reach out to the advocacy, development, and diplomatic communities here in Washington to explain the goals of the summit and how it will be organized. We think that the summit is a great opportunity to focus attention on critical developments and challenges in Africa at a time when the attention of the international community is so often focused on other regions and crises. I'm happy to report that NED, in cooperation with its new board member, Congresswoman Karen Bass, will be organizing on August the 6th, during the summit, in the House Cannon Caucus Room, a parallel Africa Civil Society Democracy Conference. We will be looking at this conference at issues of human rights and the closing of civic space to NGOs in countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Sudan. And we'll also be looking at issues related to free and independent media, ethnic and religious conflict, corruption, and democratic elections. Dave tells me that 2 Nobel laureates, Wole Soyinka and Lema Gbowie, will be joining us, and that it's also possible that Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Kofi Annan will be with us as well, along with many leading activists from civil society in Africa. I also want to note that the World Movement for Democracy Steering Committee will be meeting in Dakar next week, and we'll be discussing there how the summit might help advance democracy in Africa. I think that the turnout today shows the enormous interest here that there is in the summit. This was not a very difficult meeting to organize, by the way. It was an instance of if you build it, they will come. So welcome to everyone, and now let me turn the floor over to Dave.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carl. It really is a great honor for me to be able to moderate this afternoon's session. As Carl suggested, the turnout this afternoon is really, I think, an indication of how much interest there is in the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. And I must say that having been to many events on Africa over the years, I don't recall ever having been to one where the administration's 4 top Africa experts have all been present. So this is, I think, really a remarkable event, and we're really honored to be able to be here. I won't say too much about our panelists. You do have their bios, and I think they're all very well known to all of us. The way that we're going to proceed this afternoon is to keep it an informal conversation. I think we'll go in the order, starting with Lynn Thomas-Greenfield. Each of the guests here will make a short presentation, and then we will open it up for discussion. So, Ambassador.
Good. Well, let me join in welcoming you all here. It's great to see so many friends of Africa in the audience and personal friends who I have worked with over many, many years. As you heard, this is really going to be an exciting summer of activity for Africa in Washington. And we are delighted that you are part of that and that you have expressed an interest in being briefed on where we see things. I am going to be short because I do want to hear from you as the others in the room want to hear from you. But let me just say that this is the first time in the history of the United States that an American leader is meeting collectively with all of the African leaders in the Washington area, and we're really excited that the summit is going to be taking place in Washington, that it is generating both with our African counterparts in government as well as civil society such excitement. We have had an extraordinarily positive response from the African heads of state. We have been consulting with all of the countries, both here in Washington, with the ambassadors who are based here, using our ambassadors in Africa to consult with governments to get their ideas on issues that they would like to discuss and things that they would like to do while they're here in Washington. We have listened very, very closely to their recommendations and to their ideas, and we look forward to hearing from you, your ideas and recommendations as well. I can tell you that starting about the end of July, when we had the 500 young African leaders who are participating in the Washington program, Washington Fellowship Program, come to Washington on the 28th of July through about August 6th. Washington will be filled with excitement for everything that's happening on Africa here in Washington. So again, I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for coming out. As was mentioned a couple of times, we decided that we wanted to keep it very brief because we're much more interested in hearing from you and understanding the ideas that are on your mind and getting as much feedback as possible. Just to put or paint a thumbnail sketch of what the summit will look like. As it was mentioned, it's on August 5th and 6th for the majority of the events, but the theme overall of the summit is investing in the next generation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how that brings together a lot of different lines of effort. I know that people are familiar with the U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, but in there we've got various pillars and strategic objectives that we've been trying to make progress on in partnership with African countries. And that's both to strengthen democratic institutions, to advance peace and security, to spur economic growth, trade and investment, and also to advance sustainable and broad-based development gains. In that as well, we've also made it a priority to advance our objective of trying to engage the next generation and trying to create opportunities for young African leaders in a variety of fields, from civic leadership to entrepreneurship to public management. And so this summit is meant to bring together a lot of this work under this umbrella theme, because we think through that we'll be able to highlight a lot of long-standing investments that we've made in the continent, while also talking about how concretely we might be able to make advances on what really is a shared agenda, including what's coming out of the African Union, the agenda that many African countries are achieving and making gains on, particularly with respect to development, peace and security, other issues of mutual concern. And so this is an opportunity for us. As Linda said, it will be the first of its kind. It'll be the biggest single engagement that any U.S. president has had with Africa. And so it's on a scale and with a scope of ambition of trying to make real concrete progress on all of these issues that we think are important. And we want to do that through interesting dialogue and having less set speeches, having more of a give and take, and having more of an informal and candid exchange based on problem solving, based on lessons learned, based on experiences to date. And then around that, of course, you'll have the leader sessions. There will be a business forum, which will have a variety of businesses, large, small, medium, a variety of sectors, to really also tell that strong story of how we want to increase trade and investment. And you've seen that coming from the White House and from the President during his trip to Africa in summer of last year as a major push on trade and investment in particular. It dovetails as well with the Yali Summit, which is the week before. There will be a big civil society event as well that we'll be putting together, and other side events too. And so we're just at the right stage where we could really benefit, particularly from your thoughts and your feedback. As was mentioned, our ambassadors and our embassy teams have been really engaged, not just with governments, but also with young leaders and civil society in each country, soliciting feedback. We've crafted the agenda as much as we've crafted it to date based on this input, and we've said from the outset that we want the summit to be very action-oriented, and we want it to be very consultative in setting the agenda and the goals. And so that has been our theory throughout that we've been achieving, and so I really look forward to hearing what's on your mind and the types of ideas that you have.
Thank you, Grant, and hi, everybody. It's really, really nice to look around this room. It's a little bit horrifying to think how long some of us have been at this, but at any rate, I would just make 3 points. The first is, during the last week of July and the first week of August, rely exclusively on public transportation. It is going to be, quite seriously, Washington is going to be a very, very different city, and we've got a number of official events going on, but the number of events we have heard about from you and others, that whether it's think tanks or NGOs or universities, there will be a great number of things going on. The second, but I'm really serious about public transportation. You will not be able to move any. And we're going to fix the weather because August is going to make sure it's Washington in August is extreme, as we all know. So the second point is just to put this a little bit in context and like predicate. I think going back to the president's trip to Africa last year, and I think that one of the things we built that trip around and he came away with is a sense of quite extraordinary transformation. On the one hand, much of it quite positive. If you look around the world where we're seeing the greatest leadership on health and ending the AIDS epidemic, in Africa. If you look at the number of countries that have gone from low income to middle income, so huge progress, including some progress in progress in governance, human rights, transparency. Flip side is it is, as with most regions of the world, a period of great challenges. We have seen just alone in the last year, and by the way, we still claim Princeton and Lyman as a bit of ours, just for the record, really sharp-edged, complex crises in South Sudan, in the Central African Republic, in Mali, and the Sahel. We've seen some real challenges on the governance and democracy sides. But we've also seen a willingness to have open debate and discussion that I would certainly say, when I look back on the years I've worked on Africa, is markedly different. So I think there's a huge opportunity for a dialogue on the issues where together we can forge progress, and on the issues where there's a need for a frank back and forth. The third point is some of the things we want to get out of this and how this is a little bit different. First on that is the opportunity that I think all of us have who care about Africa, work on Africa, to educate the American public. We will have African leaders here. We will have young African leaders here. It is going to be kind of Africa Month. And I think there's a huge opportunity to showcase the diversity, the progress, the challenges, the depths, the voices from young people to leaders. And I hope that you all will join us in doing that. I still find, including as somebody who used to be a reporter, that there's still a fairly monolithic story that is told about Africa, and it's largely, quite frankly, a negative one, as opposed to a more vibrant one that, yes, like every other part of the world, has some challenges embedded in it. So I think we have collectively a huge opportunity to educate the American people about Africa and about the depth of our interests in Africa. Grant referred to this in terms of what the President put forward in his policy directive, but we have substantial interests in Africa, whether it is as an expression of our values, our economic interests, or our security interests, and those only deepen over time. So a great opportunity there. The other thing that is a bit different is we are not looking at this as a summit where it will be all about, okay, we're going to announce $80 billion because we don't know the budget's really robust. And that's kind of going to be the sum total of the story. We are in consultation with our African partners, including about things we're going to do together, about things they may bring to the summit. We also want to, and this is my last point, take the opportunity, quite frankly, as both the administration and the American people, to give some visibility to what we're doing in Africa. We are the world's leader in global health. President Obama put food security on the map and on the world's agenda, and he was able to do that in part because of leadership shown in Africa to call for countries to invest more and have comprehensive country plans. Power Africa, which he announced last summer on his trip, will be visible, and it is going, it's going like wildfire, both in terms of the bigger transactions or something we announced just last week in Africa that's beyond the grid to get to rural producers. But we also want to showcase what you are doing. So again, if there are things that you are doing, things you want to make visible, we want to work with you to do that, because I think our message to the American people, to our African partners who will be here, and to Africans in Africa is about an increasingly deep and comprehensive relationship between Africa and the United States. So I will now pass the baton to my friend and colleague Earl, and like everyone else, we're very eager to hear from all of you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. My colleagues have said how exciting this summer is going to be, and how it is already. I would also add another adjective, that it's very daunting as well in preparing for this summit. Nonetheless, it truly is exciting. I joined Gayle and Grant and Team Africa, as we say, about 2 years ago, and it was at a time that we were developing the president's strategy, which was very exciting. And to me, it really represented, having worked on Africa previously and then coming back in 2012, it represented a fundamental shift in how we view Africa and Africans and African leaders. And that is moving from a situation where it was a development recipient relationship, where we viewed Africa as a continent of crises in need of development, to one now where we see Africa and Africans as strategic partners. And so that has challenged us as a development agency in doing things differently. And I have to say that we are doing things differently. We need to change more rapidly, but we're catching up, and we're doing a lot of very good things. I won't go into the details of the initiatives that Gayle mentioned, like Trade Africa, like Power Africa, or Feed the Future, or YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative. But in all of those initiatives, what's embedded is the partnership element. Partnership and leveraging. Partnership with private sector companies. We have leveraged more than $14 billion in private sector commitments for Power Africa. Guess what? About half of that is from the continent itself. So we're trying to mobilize African funds and mobilize it in investment in Africa. On the Feed the Future and the new alliance that President Obama announced 2 years ago, more than $7 billion in commitments from private sector companies. And we're using the same approach for the Young African Leaders Initiative. And we're just seeing overwhelming support on the part of U.S. companies and U.S. institutions in engaging with Africans. And we see the same expression of interest on the part of the Africans. So it really is an exciting time. And if I could just add another theme to the themes that my colleagues have laid out, one theme that will come out is one of true partnership, strategic partnership. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Before we get into the question and answers, I just have a couple announcements. First, we're live streaming this event on our website, and we'll be tweeting about it with our Twitter handle. I always get that wrong.
I like twiddle. That's kind of good.
At Ned Democracy, any democracy. And if you would like to join the conversation, you can use the hashtag Ned Events. And then, I should say at the outset that the outreach that the administration has done on this Africa Summit, I think, is really commendable. I've been to a few events, and there's been a lot of conversation here in Washington about it. And your efforts to, organize this meeting and some others around town, I think, really show that you're very sincere and committed to, bringing in the advocacy community, if you will, or those of us NGOs that are involved in a broad array of issues concerning Africa. Here at the endowment, I wouldn't say this is a parochial interest. I think it's an interest that lots of organizations have, and certainly many of our African partners, but we are the National Endowment for Democracy. And so in terms of the agenda for the Africa U.S. Leaders Summit, obviously there are many very good democratic leaders in Africa these days, but there are some others who are not so committed to democracy and human rights, and they will be coming to Washington. And so I wonder if you could give us an idea of how these democracy and governance and human rights issues might be raised in the course of the summit. Is it possible that some sort of commitment can be got out of the summit to pay more attention to democracy and human rights? Is there a possibility that more U.S. assistance might be invested in democracy and governance? I'll throw out that question to all of you.
Yeah, we're all looking at each other. We haven't figured out who's going to answer what.
Yeah.
Commercial interruption.
Why don't I start? We have divided the conference up into a number of themes based on the consultations that we've had with all of our partners, including those on the continent. And one of those themes is governance and democracy, because we do think that that is an important topic. It's an important discussion to have with African leaders. I think we've had a lot of success on the continent in getting buy-in to elections. The next part of it is what kind of elections, and that the elections are free, fair, and transparent, and that there is a transition process. And I think some African leaders have bought into that. Others are much slower. So we do want to have this discussion. We do want to get commitments from African leaders on good governance. We're looking at some issues related to accountability, and that there are many African leaders who want to take the lead in having this type of discussion.
I would just quickly add to that the summit, to the extent that it's a 2-day summit, it's really a 3 or 4 day summit, it's really a week-long summit, it's really a 6-year-long summit, it seems like, with all the events that are around it, but it includes also, as we mentioned, the civil society event that can talk a lot about the commitments that we've made in supporting civil society and open space and having voices be heard. It's also, though, a theme throughout, as we're talking about, as the Assistant Secretary mentioned, governance and the types of values that we stand for. I think it will be infused in a lot of what we do. And it's also, though, an important choice that we made going in, that we wanted to have a broad conversation with a broad set of leaders about shared values, shared challenges, shared goals. And so it wasn't meant from the outset to be overly limited to 1 or 2 issues, or to be, it's not meant to be a lecture, it's meant to be a dialogue about how we can advance these objectives. And I think that's going to be the tone of it. It's going to be inclusive of a variety of voices. It's going to be inclusive of young leaders. The entire theme also is going to give us an opportunity to weave these issues throughout. We'll have had 500 young leaders here for a summit the week before on tracks based from entrepreneurship, but also public management and civic leadership. And these are all voices through the side events, through the topics that we raise, through the types of interventions that our president makes, and throughout, that we'll be able to speak about during the summit.
I think they covered it.
Okay.
Other.
As my colleagues have said, there are multiple themes and also different institutions that we'll be engaging with: the private sector, the government sector, the public sector, and certainly civil society will be a part of it. So it will be important to have those discussions. And, Dave, to your point, yes, we have seen some disturbing trends on open space and with regard to civil society organizations. And we know that that leaders and civil society leaders themselves are eager to take up this point. But I wanted to address another point that you raised, and that is our commitment to supporting civil society organizations and just good governance in general. And I had the pleasure of testifying on the President's budget for 2015 several weeks ago, and in that we have almost a near doubling of resources to support governments and good governance and also civil society organizations.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, I think we're ready to open it up to the audience here. Raise your hands. Please wait for the microphone. And
He's not waiting.
Okay. If you could please state your name and affiliation. And,
Walker Williams with Leadership Africa USA. I have a question that sort of touches on what Gayle said. We don't have $80 billion, but we do have some issues that are not closed. And I wonder if they're being considered by the administration. One, the reauthorization of AGOA. Two, passage of Electrify Africa Act through the Senate. And some follow-up on the U.S.-Africa Leadership Energy Summit in Addis last week, so that energy is a topic of discussion.
yeah,
Do you want to take a few?
do we want to take a few questions?
All
Yes. Maybe we'll take 3 questions at a time.
Sure.
Okay. I see. Is that Imani back there?
Imani Countess with the Solidarity Center. I'm so happy that that Ned has been able to host this event this afternoon. It's a wonderful conversation. I understand that the thinking is still in formation in terms of the civil society forum, but I'm wondering if maybe you might be able to elaborate to the extent that you can. So, for example, the timeline. When do you think that you'll have details? How would they be announced? What's the scope? Who do you think would be involved? The overall constituency sectors. Just a little bit more would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more. I see right here. Looks like we'll look over. Take the other side. Make sure.
Thank you very much, David. My name is Nial Chotut. I am with Alliance for South Sudanese in Diaspora, and I'm also co-founder for South Sudan News Agency. South Sudan, as a country, now is killing its own people. Is South Sudan invited to this event? Last weekend, we had, for this area, African Immigrant Caucus, about 2,000 people. I was one of organizing committee for that. This is what Africa needs, because Africa needs a point to tell them, if you kill your own people, you cannot come to Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can take the first one. Thank you for the question, and thank you also for your work on the U.S.-Africa Energy Ministerial. Let me be a little bit clear on what I meant by, kind of throwing $80 billion out there, because we would take it if it was available. But a couple things. One is that one of the things we have been able to do, and Earl spoke to part of it, is use our assistance in a much smarter way. And part of that is because of what's happening in Africa. So that if you look at health, for example, the gains we're seeing come in part because African governments, a growing number of them, are putting their own domestic resources into the mix. So one thing is domestic resource investments are going up. The second is leveraging, some of it's private capital, but some of it is also the participation of institutions in the U.S., as Earl said, universities, NGOs, other partners. The third piece of this is I believe we have somewhere between 12 and 14 U.S. government agencies working on this summit. And a big change that I have seen being back in government this time is our ability to marshal, quite frankly, in a coherent way, an array of tools across the U.S. government. So that assistance is not the sole driver of what we are able to do. There are all kinds of resources we're able to deploy, but we're also able to deploy a dialogue that leads to reform. So you mentioned the U.S.-Africa Energy Ministerial. We held the first ministerial last week in Addis Ababa, led by our Secretary of Energy, the Ethiopian Ministry of Energy at the African Union. And what was extraordinary about that conference is that it was about the not most exciting sides of what Power Africa are. It's what does regulatory reform need to be? What does governance reform need to be? How do you work on standards? All those kinds of nuts and bolts that are critical. Nowhere in that discussion was it necessary to say, look, y'all really better reform. It was much more a dialogue about countries saying to country X, how did you do it? Or to saying to experts at the conference, what do we need to do to get more transparency in the extractive sector? And what difference does that make? So I think there's also a political dialogue that is embedded in this. As to AGOA and Electrify Africa, the President was very clear on AGOA when he was in Africa last summer and about our commitment to a seamless renewal. AGOA is, not surprisingly, very much on the minds of our African partners, and we are also very much in support of Electrify Africa. And I think on that, I would only say that, again, as a country, I think we've learned that when we come together and when we can have the executive branch and the legislative branch and both parties and government and our own civil society all pushing in the same direction, we get a pretty strong and, more importantly, sustainable outcome. So that's very much what we're going for. And there will be definitely follow-up to the ministerial. There's a meeting on that tomorrow to which you were not invited because you're not in the government. But we will report back. But we're on the case.
And then speak to the civil society question. We're still formulating, as we mentioned at the outset, many of the events, particularly in the lead up to the leaders' sessions. And part of it is by design, because just in terms of the leader sessions, we wanted to be able to consult very closely with African leaders about what was most on their mind and what joint objectives we could pursue. The same is true with the side events and with the other events that feed into those conversations. And so for the civil society event, we're really open and looking for feedback. We've had some other meetings, as was mentioned, to start generating ideas. We know also that other groups are undertaking a lot of events, not just in August, but also in June and in July. Big summit later this month. And so we see all of this feeding into the conversation. We've asked our embassies as well to be speaking to civil society in each country, to trying to hear directly views and also to provide views here as to what types of groups would really need to be part of the conversation. We've been talking also not just with government agencies, but with outside partners, looking at how we can pull something together so that it's not just people, of course, inside the Beltway, but also with civil society from the continent, with civil society from a broad array of backgrounds. And we see it being a pretty robust event. We have to map it out in more detail, but we're very seriously focused on it, and we think there's a lot of room, given all of the issues to discuss, whether it's a series of breakout sessions, of panels, of other things like that. We're not talking a single speech or panel. We're really talking about how do we have these voices come together, and how do we have that feed into the other elements of the summit, the key takeaways, the conclusions, the key recommendations. And so that, I think you'll hear more from us, and particularly based on the ideas we get over the coming weeks, it'll be drawn into a clear focus.
Let me take a question on South Sudan.
Dan, and thank you for that question. As you know, we have been intensely engaged on trying to find a solution to what is happening in South Sudan since the 15th of December, when the fighting and the killing started. Don Booth, our special envoy, is in the field right now, participating in meetings, and as you know, Secretary Kerry was there. I traveled with him to Ethiopia and to Juba a few weeks ago to engage with Salva Kiir, and he had phone calls with Riek Machar to encourage them to go to the negotiating table, which they did, and it's only a small step. Salva Kiir has been invited to the summit. We hope we can use his presence here as an opportunity to further pressure him and further engage him to stop the fighting and move South Sudan back into a place where it's moving forward and not moving backward. There are going to be a lot of leaders that you will question whether they should be here. We've invited all African leaders to the continent who are in good stead with the U.S. government, or who are not out of the AU momentarily. So you know who those leaders are. There will be many that you have questions about. We're going to engage them. We're going to engage leaders. We want them to hear what is happening in other countries that is good, and we want them to hear from other leaders why what they're doing is not good. So it will be a dialogue. It will be engagement, and hopefully by that time the fighting will have stopped in South Sudan, because it's important that it does for all of the people.
Okay, let's see. The woman here with her. And yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Judy Miriga, coming from Confederation Council Foundation for Africa. The biggest problem I want to share with you all in Africa is land grabbing. Everybody is scrambling to get into Africa, the whole world. And here is where we want America to take the leadership, because we believe problem in South Sudan, in Kenya, in all parts of Africa is land. And when they go to grab land, there's nothing left that we are going to invest there. We will not have AGOA to provide progressive development. We will not have return for the funds that have been sent by Americans. And we will not have opening for diasporas who are here and have been investing in Africa back to their families. So we have ways and means we can share together in this panel. And the African leaders don't have the answer to the land grabbing, and they cannot provide an answer as well. If you ask them, they will not have any anything to present. But we have avenues we can go through, we can moderate, we can share and make it work. And I believe all of us here in the room will believe in what I'm trying to say, that we can make it work. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to let's see, Vivian here.
Thank you. Vivian Lowry Derrick, the Bridges Institute. And I just want to tell you how much the civil society community thanks you and is delighted that civil society is going to be specifically highlighted in the forum, because it's an opportunity to reinforce civil society's role in good governance, and I think it will make a huge difference to many African presidents. There's likely to be great discussions and finding and dialogue that comes out of the civil society meetings, and I'm wondering how these findings are going to be conveyed to the African presidents and to President Obama. I'm wondering if you had a chance to think about that yet. Thank you.
Okay, one more on this side. The guy with the white hat. Why not? Okay. You can see that. I didn't wear my glasses, so I can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. My name is Imam Babali, a founder of Imam Babali Foundation for Peace and Human Rights. I am from the Gambia, West Africa. I'm sure you will excuse my ignorance in certain issues. Just yesterday, I celebrated my 1 year being in America as an exiled citizen of the Gambia. And I'm a living witness of the abuses that are taking place in the Gambia. 2 years ago, the whole world is aware of Yahya Jammeh massacring 9 people in the name of his political, I don't know what. So I am really in a funny situation right now. I am here, I have been all granted as an asylum, asylee. Working very hard, I'm an activist, human rights activist, biased on female genital mutilation, women's education, and women's rights in the Gambia. My local organization in the Gambia is Gamco Trap, very well known. But since I came to America and stay here and trying to know America more and more, I'm coming to be more confused. Because what confused me is, really, America, whether they like it or not, the Almighty have given them the leadership role of this generation, this world today. But in my view, excuse my ignorance, they are so economical of their role, in the sense that a man like Yahya Jammeh, massacring people day in, day out, and it's very well known. Even the foreign minister of this very country, John Kerry, has made certain remarks about this Yahya Jammeh. And not only the Yahya Jammeh came to the UN building and made his bloody remarks about so many unnecessary issues, whereas Africans in general, they are in need of development. They are in need of eradicating absolute poverty. That's our priority. Our priority is education. Our problem is not a gay issue. Our problem is not lesbians. Our problem, our enemy is poverty and lack of education. So being the case, America opened a big door again for Yahya Jammeh coming all the way in the capital city of America, buying a big residence here. That confused me so much. I'm wondering now, is America making mockery of Africans, or are they making, I don't know, because I cannot understand. A man of this nature, very well known all over the world, and always in the limelight of the media, still having the freedom of buying a property in the heart of America, in the capital of America, close to White House. This is really wonderful. I just cannot understand. So being the case,
I think we get your point.
It's a good question.
you get my point.
Good question.
Thank you very much. Then
Yeah.
that's the
I think
essence.
we'll let our guests respond. Thank you.
Yeah. Take a few more.
Yeah, why don't we take a couple more?
You want to take a couple?
Yeah, let's take a couple more, and then,
Okay, fine. We'll come over to the other side. Niakwete?
Thank you very much. My name is Nia Kwete. I'm an independent analyst, but I've been in this work since the administration of Jimmy Carter from Washington. So I know where a few of the bodies are buried. But I have a process question. We have 2 months to the summit. So my question is, especially since the program seems to be forming, is there time for us to make feedback to you for suggestions and changes? Are we going to have another such meeting once we get a better look at the program to make those suggestions? And the third piece of it is, you know, as Mr. Gershman mentioned, the democracy program on the Hill, you bring in big shots, you know, Nobel Prize winners. Other parts of the program that we had, you get, I mean, very important people, which is great. But the work of lobbying for Africa in this city has to do with small fries like us. So I think that you shouldn't forget us when it comes to panel discussions or even the lawn dinner in the White House. Thank you.
Lawn dinner in the White House. Gilbert.
Gilbert Mondela from Democratic Republic of Congo. Is my understanding correct that you're inviting all the presidents? Is Mugabe coming? Excuse me, if Mugabe is coming, how do you reconcile bringing Kagame, bringing Museveni, bringing Kabila to this kind of function, especially Kabila, who just defiantly challenged the United States by refusing what John Kerry just told him not to do, and he's doing it and changing the constitution. My thing is that Africans are not given any credence in regard to what is going on in Africa, especially the diaspora. There has never been any consultation within the administration or the think tanks here with the African diaspora in general in addressing the issues of Africa. Every time there are policies that are made, they are convinced that this is the best way to go without even checking that from the African point of view and say, what do you think we should do? The civil society, I remember when Chebeya was killed, I met with him 10 days before he was killed. He told me, my brother, the Americans have abandoned us. We are here all alone. And sure enough, 10 days later, he was killed. And to these days, there has not been any investigation, serious investigation, to bring that to light. And we are continuing bringing these criminals here in the light of saying we're going to have them listen to the others and to do something constructive. I'm not seeing that. For about the past 20 years, Congo has been in chaos. And if we don't look at carefully, we're going to go in chaos, which means the whole Central Africa region is going to be in chaos. We need to have serious conversation in regard to what and who we are bringing here to talk about Africa.
Okay. You guys ready to respond?
Let me just start by saying that the comments that all of you have made are very helpful to us, and we appreciate those comments very, very much. We are having an historic summit where we will have African leaders, and we have who we have. We have the leaders who are there in Africa now, and we're going to engage them on all of these issues that you are raising today. We could decide not to have a summit and not raise these issues, but this is an opportunity for us to have a dialogue and a discussion that will allow us to share our views, to make sure that they're understood, to let other leaders share their views as well, and put pressure on individuals where there are problem countries. So it's a choice that we have made. We think it's the right choice. I don't think you would think it to be the right choice. I think every single person would have someone they wouldn't invite. And every single one of you will have someone who disagree with you on that. So we've made a choice that we think is the right choice to engage all of those countries where we have relations with those countries and try to address some of these difficult issues. We're not ignoring the issues. You were absolutely correct in saying that Secretary Kerry was in Congo and he raised these issues. They're not being ignored. This is an opportunity to keep trying to make progress. And there are so many examples where we have made progress on the continent of Africa because we have remained engaged. You cannot change people if you do not engage them. You have to engage them, and this will be that opportunity.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well, especially given the diversity of the questions, but I completely agree with Linda in terms of the theory of the case and why we think engaging is so important. That doesn't mean, as in the case of the Gambia or anywhere else, that we don't continue to speak out and to be very clear about our values. And as this previous speaker referenced, some of the statements that the Secretary and others in the administration has made about particular things that the President of the Gambia has done recently. But the engagement, I think, is the approach that we see as yielding the best fruit, particularly in the Great Lakes and elsewhere where there are real challenges. And by bringing people together and by putting things on the table and talking about them, we see it having the best opportunity to advance them. There was one question about, is there time to make suggestions? And there really is. This is what this is all about. These suggestions are very helpful to us as we craft more specifically, based on these ideas, what the agenda will look like. And then there was just one other comment as well that I really wanted to disagree with, and that's about the consultation with African diaspora. It's simply not true that we don't consult with African diaspora. In fact, the first outreach event that we did in the context of this summit was with African diaspora and a half-day event that we hosted at the White House. And we talked about the summit and got initial feedback there, but that's simply just one example because it's standard for us. It's such a vital community with so many ideas and so deeply engaged that the African diaspora are a critical part a critical voice, including as we're thinking about the Doing Business in Africa campaign and trade and investment and trying to get them more involved, as we're talking about connecting with young leaders in Africa and how to connect diaspora as well to our activities, and just across the board on all of our policies. That's been a set of voices that has been regularly consulted, certainly in the entire time I've been in this job in the last 3 years, and I think back before that to the start of the administration. So that's one thing, sir, that I think we have a much different view on based in terms of our regular outreach there. Those are the key things that I wanted to speak to. I know you all.
Yeah, I just say a couple things on feedback, and we have points of contact we can share. And what we're doing is we're cooking a really rich stew here, right? So we've had a series of consultations. We will be continuing to have consultations. We will ourselves organize some events that are deliberately designed to feed into the kind of tapestry that informs what the actual discussions are among leaders. Many of you are having events. Grant referred to an event that's being held this month, a civil society forum. We're very much looking forward to hearing from that group and from other groups. Here's some things that we think would be important to include on the agenda and somehow cover. I would say to you in doing that, your critiques, here's where you have to play hardball, totally fair, and I have no doubt that there's strength of view. Heaven knows, I think we've all got strength of views on that. We will, as I think Linda very clearly laid out, we will engage. This is a president who, since he was elected, has made very clear that his view of the way we engage in the world is that we engage even with people we don't like and we disagree with. But in addition to your critiques and your concerns, we'd also like to ask for your thoughts on solutions. I'll give you just a small example of one of the things we've been able to do as an administration, which has been very significant, which is the Open Government Partnership, which President Obama announced jointly with an array of other governments that quite wasn't your usual suspects. It wasn't the U.S. and Europe. It was us and Brazil and the Philippines and Mexico and South Africa and Norway and the U.K. and Indonesia, and I think I got them all right there. And that is an agreement among governments and civil society that governments will govern more openly and civil society will be the vehicle for accountability, but also the beneficiary of what happens when governments govern in a more open manner, because then citizens participate. It is not the total solution, but it has proven to be a great model of the complementarity between government and civil society, the back and forth and the give and take that can demonstrate to both sides, quite frankly, that governments are challenging. I know that. I'm part of one now. I used to be an NGO, and I know we're really tough. And there are some governments who find civil society challenging. But if you've got thoughts on solutions or practical ideas of those areas where in the areas you're concerned about, like the comment on land grabbing, I think if you've got solutions, share those with us. To our colleague from the Gambia, and by the way, your work sounds quite extraordinary, and I salute you for that. Your thoughts on, in addition to where you rightly think and strongly believe we need to be tough, what are some recommendations you would have that fall into the category of, all right, there may be an opening here, you should push somebody in this direction, or here's something that we've found has worked in my country and might work somewhere else. So please share both with us. We're gathering all this information. We will have a Young African Leaders Summit feed in. We'll have a civil society event feed in. We're consulting with our African partners. We're consulting with a huge number. We're consulting massively. And our job then is to weave all of that together and inject that into the dialogue in the summit. So, as I say, feed us anything you think we need to factor in, and we'd like to weave it into that tapestry.
Right. Oh, okay. The Assistant Secretary has to catch a flight in about an hour or so, so thank you very much. Earl, do you want to say something first? Or?
Yeah, if I could fill in the gaps. And Vivian, thanks for your question. And I think Gayle addressed your point, and that is if you look at the way that the summit is sequenced, the civil society event is before the actual summit starts. So it's an opportunity for messages to be heard and reacted to. Getting back to the issue that Gayle addressed as well on land grabbing and land tenure, it's a critical development issue. It affects investment, obviously, and also it's a source of conflict. It's a technical issue as well as a political issue. And so we do engage at a technical level as well as a policy level. But we would like, as Gayle mentioned, we would like to hear from you on what your institute is doing and how we can get your work fed into our work.
Good. Let's see. Oh, this is difficult. So many hands. I've seen this hand for quite a while here, so gentleman here, standing.
Good afternoon. My name is Caleb Rossiter. I teach African Studies at American University. I first just want to thank you very much for coming and listening. And I want to thank the people in the audience with very strong feelings for actually talking with and listening to, rather than talking at our hosts. I've just come back from the Sudan and Uganda, and my air stops were Addis and Cairo. It's hard to imagine this meeting in any of those four capitals with actual dialogue where people are listening to representatives of their government. So I thank you very much. It's really wonderful to see. I feel like there's an elephant in the room. And as they say in Zulu land, wena ndlovu, here comes the elephant. Military political power. I sometimes feel like I'm trapped in about 1982 with the war on terror and the importance we ascribe to having good military relationship and intelligence relationships with African governments, replacing the need from the Cold War to have good relationships. The actors have changed. You know, back then we were aiding Somalia and Sudan and Zaire, all of which have completely changed in that time. But now we have similar relationships with repressive governments, but who are important to our security needs. And I guess you're looking for solutions. My solution would be we should be considering, I think it's wonderful to talk with and bring to the United States, no matter what you've heard expressed in this room today, virtually any government in the world for dialogue. But I don't think we should be providing military assistance and training to governments who would not be judged by NED to be truly democratic.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay, I'll get Fred behind. I'll go Fred first, and then the woman next. Green. Sorry.
Thank you very much, David. And I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the administration for really bringing the first summit. This has been part of the AGOA legislation that there should be head of state summit. But this is the first administration that would convey that. Would you please share with us how the AGOA summit will fit into this whole landscape and what will be the role of civil society? Being the first summit that we would have head of states, we think it's going to be critical to have a very strong civil society participation in the discussion. My other question is, we're expecting a lot of important people coming to Washington, and most of them coming from Africa, and they will be coming, spending 22 hours just to get into Washington. Is there any way during the summit that we can address this whole issue of air transportation linkages between Africa and the United States? This
Jetpacks
definitely affect the competitiveness of African product in the United States under AGOA. It's been one of the major issues in lack of small, medium enterprise product coming into the United States. So these are issues that I hope will be addressed not only during the summit, but also to see how we could have a serious dialogue during the AGOA ministerial and summit. I believe that will be in August the 5th. Can you please share with us how that will go? Thank you.
Good. I think the woman here has been, yes.
Thank you. I'm Amelia, Ambassador of Mozambique. First of all, I would like to thank this gathering where we, myself as ambassador, I see other colleagues here, we have this opportunity to share what we had been sharing as ambassadors we had been gathering with the representatives of the administration. And I would like to say that this summit comes in the right time, because we as ambassadors had been looking for it from a long time ago. My question is, I know that there is a chapter related with the first ladies, and there are first ladies doing a lot in Africa, in health, education, agriculture. Can you please elaborate a little bit more about the role of the first ladies while in Washington? Thank you.
I think maybe we can take a
couple more. Yeah.
couple more. The woman here in white. And then,
Great, thank you.
gentleman away.
Good afternoon. I'm British Robinson with Women for Women International, and actually the First Lady's question was my question as well. It was so wonderful last summer to see Mrs. Obama and Mrs. Bush do a wonderful event in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And I think a number of the folks attending that commented that it was such a wonderful show of diplomacy, but also how much we care as the American people for the continent of Africa. And I really hope that you're able to show that as well again this year, and would love to hear more about that. My second point is part of the solution, which is women and girls. I hope that you have a very key agenda feature item. I'm sure you will, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it, on women and girls. I think it's absolutely critical, and as an organization laser focused on marginalized women and girls on the continent, we would be happy to share any advice or support all of you and your efforts, particularly our colleagues at USAID. So we just want to hear more about that, and then how we can be helpful in that process. And thank you both for your help. Thank you.
And there's a gentleman that's been standing up in the back, waving frantically.
Hello. My name is Abdoulaye Jogo Balde. I'm a civil society activist from Guinea-Conakry, West Africa. I'm very happy to have this wonderful panel here. I'm sorry, my English is not very good. And I know some of you by internet, by some links. And that I want to say, you have to look very well about the report that you have about Guinea, because the situation in Guinea is very critical. And you know that Guinea is neighbor from Liberia, from Sierra Leone, and you know there's a strategical and ethnical problems in Guinea. And the government try until now to entertain that problem with the milice called Donzo. And what are you propose, or what you will do for us for peace, to keep peace in Guinea, that will prevent war? Because everybody know that in 2015 there will be an election in Guinea. And Guinea is a very rich country, and the population are very poor, and was colonized by the French people. And I want the government of USA to be more interested about the Guinean situation, because you know, there is more than 200 people was killed in the stadium on September 2008 by the military. And this government came, they entertain the same problems, and they arrest many people. They are in jail, and until now there is civil rights violation in Guinea-Conakry. Even if you look at the news, you have to make sure about all information that the embassy give you about Guinea, and to work with the civil society to have the good information about it, because the situation is very critical. I'm telling you, the situation in Guinea is very critical. If you didn't take and prevent, there will be a next, you know, I don't hope that, but like Rwanda, something like that. And, you know, I'm here, I have an opportunity to be here. I have to, if there is a possibility to meet to prevent that, because you invite Alpha Conde in here. And, you know, more than, every Guinea have independence, until now, there is no justice in Guinea. Until now, there is no justice. And the government tried to entertain this crime in Guinea, and they don't want nothing. My second question is how...
Maybe I think that's enough.
Okay.
Maybe we can turn it back to our...
I want to thank you so much for your job. You are doing a good job, and internet. That's why I will not be here. You are doing a good job, your staff. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll take this round, I think, and then if we've got, yeah.
Here again, we got a lot of great questions and also on a wide variety of themes. Let me start with the professor's question about military assistance. I think I understand and respect where you're coming from. I think, though, as we're trying to balance interests and also advance shared security objectives, both in countering terrorism, but also in advancing peacekeeping and other peace and security needs on the continent, that we've got complex relationships with a lot of actors, and it's not limited to Africa, but globally. We engage in a lot of different levels and have mature and sophisticated relationships with countries where it might be incredibly complex on governance issues, it might be equally incredibly complex on security issues, but to advance U.S. values and also U.S. national interests, and particularly in Africa when we're talking about a very real terrorist threat, and we're talking also about the very real need for atrocity prevention and preventing conflicts from spiraling out of control, and needing to work with governments that are quite committed to peacekeeping or that have capacity to aid and assist, that in terms of our assistance, we're able to advance objectives that aren't limited only to how we might rank on very legitimate indices or what we think of governance in the country or respect for human rights across the board. It's not a black and white relationship. We speak out against anti-LGBT legislation and laws in Uganda. We're unequivocal. We talk about the measures that we need to take in response to them. At the same time, we work with Ugandans as part of AMISOM in advancing peace and security in Somalia. We work with Ugandans as part of a counter-LRA mission that is seeking to try to prevent the LRA from wreaking havoc over Central Africa as they have for decades. And so it's not as clear-cut in our mind in terms of only being able to provide or only being in our interest to provide such assistance. What we need to do is strike the balance, and what we need to do is advance our security and our governance and our objectives across the board, and be true to our values, and be vocal, and be also in private advancing the goals that we need to advance. So I take your point, and I understand where you're coming from, but I think that's how we think of it. In the policymaking process, you've got to balance a lot of different competing objectives and issues and advance U.S. interests in doing so. I know that Gayle and Earl will have much to say on a lot of these other issues. I wanted to speak this also, though, to Guinea, which I take your point, sir. It's something that we're very focused on. Our Ambassador Lascaris, and our embassy team have been really, it's been disturbing to hear some of the reports back about the risk of violence, the direction that you mentioned. I think there are a lot of good things going on, but we need to be continuing to reach out to all relevant parties, as we have been, to urge seeking electoral solutions, to urge reconciliation and dialogue, to urge really constructive solutions to some of the challenges. And so I take note, though, of the depth of your concern, and I think that's really important to put on the table. I wanted to say one other thing on the spousal program before turning it over. This is something that is really important to us and also really exciting, and I'm glad as well that to hear such positive feedback about the way we advanced this program that the First Lady did in the context of the trip last summer. We're taking a very similar approach this time, and one of the things that we're able to highlight, as Gayle mentioned, we're highlighting a lot of things, including our long-standing investments, but we're also highlighting a very bipartisan approach and deep, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that care very deeply about Africa. And we're able to do that just as an example in this spousal program where the First Lady is very focused on cooperating with Laura Bush and her foundation, and they've been doing phenomenal work with First Ladies across the continent. And so I think we're really focused on that partnership and pulling that out as part of this summit. I think there'll be a lot to talk about there. It goes back also to some of the issues about women and girls, women's economic empowerment, girls' education in particular. These issues are very much on our mind. They're also very much on the First Lady's mind. I think those will be natural candidates for real areas of emphasis in the program, but not just for the spousal program, but throughout the summit. Just as we are interweaving YALI and young leaders and youth throughout everything that we do, we want to do the same with women and girls and with gender issues to make sure that this is something that is part of everything. It may be a standalone side event, but that's not how we see it. It may be an opportunity here or there to draw particular focus, but what we're all the more focused on is that as part of the business forum, we're talking about young entrepreneurs. We're talking about women and girls. We're talking about opportunities for all. That in all of the sessions that the leaders have, I think that also will be an issue, youth, women and girls in particular. And so I think we'll have a lot to say on it, and it's a point well taken.
I just add a few things, and I think, Caleb, coming back to you, and it's nice to see you here. Well, one of the things that's really I find interesting, I've been an activist for much of my life. I go back and forth between being an NGO and now my second time in government. And one of the things I like about government most days is the intellectual challenge of having to weave together multiple strands of interest, so that, as Grant suggests, we cannot sort of say, well, we're just going to have to let Somalia go because there aren't countries that, you know, pass a certain test. On peacekeeping, for example, there are some countries that have risen to the top in terms of being good, disciplined peacekeepers. We just, to your point, sir, on South Sudan, as you may know, the Security Council passed a new mandate for the UN peacekeeping mission there. There are regional troops going in. They're critically important because, quite frankly, the region, in addition to having qualified, very, very good peacekeeping troops, also has a message as the region that they have conveyed politically and otherwise. So I think we have to do all those things at once, and it is a challenge. I just want to make one other point here, that something I think we can't underestimate, which is on the issue of terrorism in Africa. The thing that keeps me up at night is that. And just to be clear on how we're trying to approach that. I mean, it's when you think about the bleed that is Boko Haram, when you think about Al-Shabaab brought us a famine in Somalia and is doing its best to try to destabilize countries in the region, such that we saw Westgate, see a couple bombs go off in Nairobi or Mombasa every once in a while. It is exceedingly dangerous to everything I think all of us want, whether it is stability or democracy or thriving civil societies, or for girls to grow up and go to school and get good educations. Part of our work on that is necessarily security cooperation, because this is a real-time threat and challenge. But part of it is also a very robust development agenda of trying to grapple with a few things. One is, how do you deal with vast ungoverned spaces in some of these countries where, whether it's terrorists or illicit financial syndicates can get in the mix. The drug trade in Africa is not insignificant at all, so that is one. How do we get governments to do one of the things that is critical for any capable state, which is to deliver public services, so that people looking at a government think there's some rationale for that government's existence, and something that actually serves the interests of the people. So it is it's a short-term reality that, again, if you look at the Horn of Africa, if you look at the Sahel, if you look at Boko Haram, I think cannot be underestimated. But there's also a longer-term plan there that includes importantly looking at the security sector, which is a very good point of entry in a lot of these countries to be talking about governance in ways that are not sufficient to the point I think you're fairly making, but are important openings. And I think it's one of the things that, quite frankly, our military does very well in addition to our diplomats. On AGOA, how we reduce the transport time, that's a trick. Although I will say, I did recently go to Addis and went on a direct flight, and 12 hours was a lot easier than, 2 legs and 8 and 8. But nonetheless, Earl, maybe you can talk about some things you're doing with associations, because part of the way to get to that is to enable regional integration and for countries to aggregate and for investors to aggregate a bit, because we've got a lot of small markets, and when you get to a certain size, you are positioned to make enough profit that you can afford a higher transport cost. So that's, Earl, you may want to talk about that. On the AGOA ministerial, that will take place as part of the regular process on AGOA, and I think we are quite interested in thoughts that you may have. I've written down your transport. I'm really trying to figure out the solution to that other than aggregation, but a couple other things for you on that. We're looking at how we can get better uptake and utilization of AGOA. I think many of you who've worked on AGOA or been familiar with it for a long time know that the uptake is quite frankly uneven. There's some countries that have benefited more than others, so we've taken a very deliberate look at how we can ensure that more countries are able to take advantage of the benefits provided by AGOA and what we need to do on that. We're also looking at trade capacity building and what we can do. Trade Africa that the President launched last summer was about starting with the East African community, was looking at how we can help accelerate the integration of these regional markets. But we're looking at a menu of other things on the trade capacity building side. For example, on standards, whether it's phytosanitary or some of the other things that are needed in the legal and regulatory spaces to, again, enable more countries to get the benefits of AGOA and also foster something that is, I think, very important within Africa and a stated priority, which is to promote more internal trade and regional integration. But if you've got specific things on AGOA, please share them with us, and in particular on this issue of uptake and making sure that the preference program is taken advantage of by more countries and more effectively. And that's something we've certainly heard from our African partners that they're interested to discuss.
Great. You raised the issue of transportation costs and time from Africa to the U.S. It's worse within Africa itself because of all the transportational weaknesses, to include non-tariff barriers that are erected, as well as weak infrastructure. So that's been a focus of ours and really a laser focus since the President launched Trade Africa, which focuses on East Africa. And we feel that we've made a lot of progress in working with civil society institutions, private businesses and associations, as well as governments to reduce transportation costs. One of the things that we're trying to get at for greater utilization of AGOA is scale. And it's very difficult for Rwanda, for example, to take advantage of AGOA. I picked Rwanda because it has the highest transportation costs in the world. Landlocked country, poor infrastructure, but doing its best to come up with an external strategy. What we're trying to do is look at ways of building linkages and also value chains that cut across a number of countries to take advantage of comparative advantages. We've been very successful, and I can't really announce some of the large partnerships that we've created with African apparel institutions as well as U.S. companies. And so those announcements will come out. But Gayle's point is that we need to look at scale, absolutely, to get at utilization. And we also need to look at how we can get linkages on the continent and tie them to U.S. investment as well as U.S. Importers. Let me just mention one thing with regard to women's economic empowerment and girls, specifically girls' education. I will say, and end it with this, that there will be a very steady drumbeat leading up to the summit on those issues. And so stay tuned, I guess, is what I will end with.
Okay,
yeah,
Chris here.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you all for giving us this opportunity to hear from you about this very exciting summit. I think many of us, all of us in this room, are really excited about this summit, and we're looking forward to it. Mine is, it's a very simple process question, but I'd like to preface that by saying that I agree that all of these issues that are being discussed are very intertwined, whether it's trade and investment, but also the rule of law and creating an enabling environment to attract private investors, on peace and security, as well as democracy and governance. And so when Prof stood up and said that there was an elephant in the room, for me, the elephant is democracy and governance. Mm-hmm. And I think we can't escape that, even from the comments that have come from some of the participants. And I would like to think that for many Africans across the continent, the watershed moment for them was the president's speech in Accra, Ghana. And as you go across the continent, there are young people who can recite to you word for word what the president said in Accra. And we know that in Accra, Ghana, the president said his first priority, and the 4 or 5 priorities that he laid out, was the whole issue of democracy and good governance. Yep. And the president said Africa doesn't need strong men, Africa needs strong institutions. And
all we need.
Yes, we need strong institutions. And we may be in a position where, I mean, the assistant secretary is already gone, but we're going to end up with who comes and who has been invited, that's already a settled issue. But the question for me would be, what comes out of this summit? What comes out of all of the conversations? And is there some thought to a deliverable, especially on the DG question, especially on the democracy and governance question? Because if there isn't a deliverable that Africans can hold on to, and to say the president has been consistent from day one on this issue, and he's held the line, and it's up to the African leaders to deliver, then I'm worried that part of his message is going to be diluted. Because as we know so well, probably the first leaders to RSVP and to confirm their participation were the leaders who in the past would have thought they would have the least opportunity to visit Washington. So they're going to go back and use the summit for domestic consumption. And is there some way, is there some thought being given to the fact that the administration has to come out at the end of this summit with a clear message to Africans that the president is consistently on his message with regards to democracy and governance?
Let's see, I have a question here, and a question here.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. This is Abdullah Babikir from Sudan. I think we need, like, I don't know, from like a scholarship for the all leader Africans coming, like, because we have problem with education in Africa. When we get this, like, I don't want to say 1 million or 10,000 scholarship for 10 years, this program, because this is only one thing is all Africa or all people can share it with the governor. When we give governor money, like 1 million or 2 million or 1 billion, he can put in his bucket, he say, I need more. But when you have a scholarship with America in Africa, this is sharing for everybody. I think we need this is more than everything. With the leaders coming in, I think this U.S. can give this leader a scholarship because they're sharing for everybody in Africa. This is why I think. Also, I have some question. Omar al-Bashir here in Sudan, 24 years or 25 years almost, he killing people. Every day he kill 100 or 200 people. I don't know why. I don't want to say U.S., United States, hold these guys or pushing him to do that. How going to be peace in Africa when these guys, like crazy guys, he's saying 25 years, no anybody can tell him move or stop killing people. This big problem in Africa happen. Thank you.
I think there was a woman back. Is it you? Right here, yeah. Julie, yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Julie Mancuso Craig with the Center for International Private Enterprise, one of the 4 core institutes of the National Endowment for Democracy. I echo the sentiment and the gratitude for all your hard work in pulling this together. It's no easy task. I do want to highlight a couple of things and then ask a question too. One, in terms of, I think, leveraging resources on the continent, the small, medium enterprise sector needs to be tapped into. And as much as I applaud U.S. business to Africa business efforts, we work with the local grassroots business in Africa, and about 80% of your economy is there. And so making sure using the institutes of business, such as associations and chambers that house these many voices, I think is a great way to get feedback, input, and buy-in on AGOA, as well as other opportunities. So encourage you to consider how we might engage those audiences. My other question is more about the size and scale of this. I'm sure you've heard some of the critiques about this as sort of maybe a legacy project and less likely to have outcomes. So I second Chris's question about sort of what does success look like for you in this process, and also how are you balancing the need to kind of create bilateral messaging rather than treating and kind of echoing sentiments that Africa is treated as a monolith from the United States, which I know we don't think that, but something as such a grand scale can kind of help unintentionally exacerbate those perceptions. So thank you again.
Thank you. I have a number of questions from the overflow room too, so let me just throw in
a couple of those.
A couple of us? Okay,
yeah,
good.
But I think this is the last one.
The one sort of is along those similar lines. asking about this question of the African leaders not even having 10 minutes with the president, that there's not going to be any one-on-one meetings with any of the heads of state, unlike what's been the case, I guess, with these summits in China and elsewhere. Actually, I think most of these other questions have already been answered in one way or another, so
okay.
I'll just make that one.
Well, I know since this is our last round, I just wanted to start by thanking you all again for the great questions, but also for the ideas and for the ongoing engagement and the work that you do every day in advancing these issues. It's some tough questions, which I think is exactly what we had hoped for, because it challenges our thinking, and it also forces us to articulate how we're trying to balance many different objectives and really make this summit very outcome-driven. Outcomes, I think, was a consistent theme, and success for us, I think, is that we'll look back on this summit a year from now, 5 years from now, and we'll see that we've done things differently because of it, or we've significantly and concretely advanced certain objectives because of it. We're, as we mentioned, quite deliberately in a very consultative process, particularly with the African leaders that will be attending. It was never our intention to say, you're invited to the summit, here's the date, here's the session, here's what we'd like you to speak about, here's the outcome, please be sure to sign by July 5th. That's not been the approach at all. It's been a conversation that's ongoing, and saying that here are the issues as we see them. And it's been also gratifying in terms of the consultations that have taken place, where we've really aligned with the African leaders of the issues that have risen to the top, both on peace and security, on governance, illicit finance issues like that, on issues about the development investments that we've made, and then also even in supporting young leaders. Now our task, though, is more concretely to figure out the outcomes within those. How can we advance the ball? How, under the governance issues, what outcomes might we think of more concretely to be able to do that? That's something we're really actively talking about with the African leaders and figuring out what that would look like. Same is true for young African leaders. What commitments might we make, but also what commitments might we encourage African leaders to make, too? We have not been thinking about this, as Gayle mentioned before, as a party where we show up with billions of dollars of deliverables, because that's really a more traditional and outmoded mindset, I think, for what we're talking about. This is something where we're thinking, as this shared agenda, we need to really drill down on what those outcomes can be based on those objectives. It's not a long communique. It's not a formalized process. It's something that we want it to be driven by the shared issues that we think would have the highest impact. A couple of quick comments, though, on some of the other points. On the SMEs and also local grassroots organizations in the chambers and the institutes, that's a really interesting point, I think, for us to take back and think through how we make sure that we're fully engaged there as well. And the point about Africa not being a monolith, that's an exceptional point as well. It is really difficult to advance all of these objectives, or I'll use the word daunting. It is daunting as we think about the breadth of agenda issues that we want to advance and the number of leaders that will be engaging, how to structure this in the way that will best do that. We've been quite deliberate in how we do it, and it's an ongoing conversation as we really clarify exactly at each step what it will look like. But that's something that we've got to keep in mind at every point. I think, though, both on that and also on democracy and governance generally, you've seen a very consistent style of engagement from this president. And for instance, in his trip to Africa last summer, you saw that he highlighted these democracy and governance themes. He did it in a way, though, that didn't imply any sort of, on any issue, it didn't imply any sort of monolithic, this is what Africa is, this is the face of Africa. But it was engaging. It was him meeting with chief justices from around the continent and talking about rule of law issues and taking that back and asking us to work on it more. It was him meeting with civil society in Senegal and hearing directly some of the challenges, some of the opportunities. It was him and his remarks going back to Accra, but also in South Africa, in which he delivered, hitting these consistent themes. And so I think you'll be unsurprised to see that our president will engage in this summit the same way of, it's not a monolith, and he is the first to understand that, and is the first to understand the vitality of the issues and the challenges and the opportunities, and to want to engage on them. One last point on scholarships, because I know colleagues want to address many of these. You made an important point about what do you give to leaders versus what do you give to the people and to citizens. Scholarships, support like that. I just wanted to draw that out a little bit because it goes back to our theme of investing in the next generation. And throughout, in all of these issues, we are very focused in what opportunities can we advance. YALI, as an example, we mentioned there'll be a YALI summit. Before that, there'll be 500 young leaders coming to Washington after having spent 6 weeks at universities across the country, getting skills building and skills training on entrepreneurship, on civic leadership, on public management. But it's a focus on both, not just traditional scholarships and what we can provide, but also what opportunities then does that yield in Africa. And so as part of that program, for instance, we're very focused on ongoing opportunities, internships, work at nonprofits and NGOs, at regional organizations in Africa that these young leaders can have opportunities for. And I mentioned it just as an example of the type of mindset, because it really is focused on how do we make lasting investments, how do we draw out the long-standing investments that we have made so that the opportunities exist, so that there are concrete skills and abilities in these future generations, because that is going to be where all of the goals that we're trying to achieve in strong democratic institutions, in transparent and responsible governance, in peace and security and the like, we see that as a critical investment in being able to advance those goals.
Let me just say thanks to everybody also. I think we've all got a lot of cards with a lot of suggestions and thoughts, and we'll want more of that, and we will be continuing to consult throughout. And just again to remind you, I know many of you are planning events, and if you've got outcomes of these things or concrete recommendations, send them our way. Chris, thank you for a very important question. And my view, like if there's an elephant in the room, you know, invited to sit down at the table and speak. And it quite frankly need not be an elephant in the room. I think there's no one among us or anywhere in the administration who believes that absent the architecture that comes from open societies and rule of law, that all of the things we would hope to see, sustainable peace, development that benefits all citizens, including marginalized, whether it's marginalized girls or the extreme poor, you've got to have that architecture. The short answer to will there be something is yes. But a couple other things I would throw out. One is something that President Obama does exceptionally well is to speak very, very, very frankly. And he does it in a very artful way. He doesn't pull any punches, but he does it in a way that invites a discussion on some challenging issues. And as Grant suggested, he did that throughout the trip. And I think we'll see him do that again. So I think you can and should expect him to say what needs to be said and be plain about it. And one of the things he does very well when he does that is talk about what it means to be a leader. And we are governments. And as governments, we have these obligations. So I think you'll hear some of the same language that was in the Accra speech and deliverables and manifestations of that commitment. I would just point to one other thing that we are trying as an administration to institutionalize, and that is this notion of young leaders. I don't get to travel as much as I used to, but I've done some recently, and one of the things I'm struck by is every embassy I go to, they're just going on and on and on about, we just did a meeting with our young leaders, and the vibrancy and the ideas and the perspective on what they want to see is something we want to bring to the table, because at the end of the day, that's who these leaders govern. And it's a way in this frame of focusing on the next generation for all of us to talk about, all right, here's where we are now. How do we need to set things up so that generation of young leaders has fewer of the challenges that some may have today? And I think it's an extraordinary opening and something we very much want to institutionalize along with something else. There was reference, I think Earl, you may have mentioned it, or Grant, of our embassies reaching out to civil society in advance of the consultation. The president, every time he travels, when he went to Russia, at a point when Russia was making great hay about locking up NGOs and so on and so forth, he did a meeting with civil society, quite plainly. Our embassies do that regularly. We're going to need your help to institutionalize some of these things in our own government. because one of the sincere hopes we have is that we can change the way we do business enough that a future administration will not say, well, that's just what the last group did, but maintain that as part of the regular order. So we're going to need your help on that. Further on the fellowships, in addition to what Grant described in the Young African Leaders initiative, I think you will find in both health and food security, there is a lot of work there, and you will hear about more. It's something we also want to highlight because we've got a long history of investing in Africa's human resource capacity, and I think it's one that we don't demonstrate sufficiently to Africa or to our own people. If you look at who leaders are in health science, a number of fields, the number of people who are educated in this country, we want to do more of that, but we want to make much clearer that we are doing that. On the SME side, you're absolutely right to point that out, and whether it is in Feed the Future or now with the Beyond the Grid initiative, sub-initiative, really clumsy phrase, that we launched last week. I think you also see in the business forum that we're doing the full spectrum of business. So it's from the young, small entrepreneurs, young and old small entrepreneurs, full spectrum to the big side. I think that where I would leave it is in terms of outcomes and what does success look like. Endorsing everything Grant said, I would just throw out a couple of other things. One is we want some momentum out of this. I don't think we are looking at the summit as the end game of a lot of work, but also the point from which to launch additional work that will carry us forward. So in a number of areas, we're looking at what we might agree to do over the next year or two. So some real momentum. And that's a way on some of these issues that I think many of you have identified that are the tougher issues. There's a real opportunity there to say, okay, we all agree that this is an issue, then let's work together over the next 6 months to do X, Y, or Z. So I think outcomes that are ongoing. And I think the second thing, and I may be saying this with some sentimentality, but I do hope that one of the things that will come out of this summit is that the United States will be a country that has a foreign policy and global engagement that includes the entire world, including Africa. And that the American people and people across the African continent will see that our relationship is part and parcel of our global engagement, and not, just something that comes in after the fact. And I think, again, one of the things we're seeing in terms of what we're doing as an administration, in fact, what's happening in Africa is, I think, finally coming to fruition, a relationship that is among equals. And that, again, I hope we can lay the foundation for a robust relationship that others will follow. After some of us retire and go back to being activists and advocates and going to events like this and asking the government people what they're going to do.
Actually.
Well, thank you, Gayle, Grant, Earl. I think this has really been a wonderful opportunity that we've had this afternoon. The administration's willingness to engage with the NGOs and others concerned about Africa, and the momentum that's building up for this Africa Summit, I think, is really starting to grow. And so I can assure you that the endowment and our partners are going to be very interested in how we can help make this a success. We'll continue to be in communication, and we wish you luck with it. Thank you very much.